All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into how something as seemingly simple as an image can shape global politics.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It is. You know, we see images everywhere,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking to international relations.
Right.
But we rarely stop to think about how those images shape our perceptions
Absolutely.
and ultimately influence actions on a global scale.
Exactly.
So for all our listeners out there who are prepping for the UPSC exams,
Yeah.
especially those of you tackling international relations,
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be really crucial.
It is.
So let's start by unpacking this whole idea images a bit.
Okay.
What are we even talking about here? Is it just a
Yeah.
literal picture,
Well,
or is there something deeper at play?
it's a great question, and it's actually something that our source material dives into quite deeply.
Okay.
When we're talking about images in this context, we're going beyond just a photograph or picture. We're talking about mental constructs, frameworks that we use to make sense of the world around us.
So these mental constructs, these images, they're kind of like shorthand for more complex ideas,
Exactly.
or even like entire nations.
Precisely. It's like that old saying, we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are.
Yeah.
So our own individual experiences, cultural backgrounds, even our education,
Right.
all of these factors influence how we perceive images.
And then in turn, how those perceptions shape our understanding of global events.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about what we see, but also how we interpret it.
Exactly.
Our own biases, our preconceived notions,
Yes.
they all come into play.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is starting to sound pretty deep.
It is. It is.
And I can see how this is absolutely crucial for understanding international relations.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing facts and figures for the UPSC.
Right.
It's about understanding perceptions
Absolutely.
and the narratives behind those events.
Yeah.
I think the source material called it trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces.
It did. Yeah.
You might have all the facts, the dates, the key players.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't understand the images shaping those events,
Right.
you're missing a crucial part of the picture.
Absolutely.
So let's try to get a little bit concrete here.
Okay.
What are some real-world examples of how these images actually play out?
All right. Well, let's think about scientific breakthroughs for a second.
Okay.
Because, in the source material, the author highlights how many revolutionary ideas began as mental images before they were ever proven through experiments.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, even scientists rely on their imagination
Precisely.
to make sense of the world.
Yeah,
That's pretty mind-blowing.
it is.
Can you give us an example?
Well, take Darwin's theory of evolution, for example.
Yeah.
He didn't just stumble upon natural selection in a lab somewhere.
Right.
He spent years and years observing the natural world, forming a mental image of how species change over time. And that image, that vision, was crucial for developing his groundbreaking theory.
Wow. So even in a field like science, these mental constructs, these images, they play a really fundamental role.
Yeah.
It's like they provide the framework for understanding these complex phenomena.
They do, and it's the same principle that applies to global politics as well.
Okay.
So just like scientists use images to try to understand the natural world, nations use them to understand each other and to navigate this international arena.
So are we talking about national image here?
You got it.
Like how countries present themselves on the world stage?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Okay, so national image.
Yeah.
It's a powerful tool in international relations.
Powerful, powerful tool.
It's basically how a country wants to be perceived by the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
That's like their brand, right?
It is, yeah.
It shapes how others interact with them.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, the source material mentioned the 2008 Beijing Olympics as a really good example of this.
It did.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. The Beijing Olympics were really like a masterclass in shaping national image.
Okay.
You see, China really wanted to showcase itself as this modern, powerful nation, a nation that was ready to take its place on the global stage.
Right.
So they invested very heavily in these stunning stadiums, cutting-edge technology, and of course, that incredibly meticulously choreographed opening ceremony.
Oh, I remember watching that.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
It was.
It was like they were sending a message to the whole world, like, look at us, we've arrived.
Exactly. And that image, that very carefully crafted projection of power and modernity, It definitely had an impact on how other nations viewed China.
And it probably still does to this day, right?
It does.
I mean, a strong national image can attract investment,
Oh, absolutely.
foster diplomatic ties, and even influence a country's standing in international organizations.
Exactly.
It's a form of soft power.
It is, yeah.
And it can be just as potent, I imagine, as military might or economic leverage.
Oh, for sure.
So this is making me think about, how important it is to be media literate.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to international news.
Absolutely.
If these images are so powerful,
right.
we really need to be able to critically analyze what we're seeing and what we're hearing.
We do. That's a really critical point, and one that's especially relevant for our UPSC aspirants out there.
Absolutely.
You really need to be able to deconstruct these images, understand how they're being used, and identify any potential biases or agendas that might be at play.
So it's not just about reading the news at face value.
No.
It's about really digging into the complexities behind the image that's being presented.
Precisely.
Wow, this is giving you a whole new perspective on how to approach international relations, I have to say. It's not just about memorizing all those facts and figures.
No.
It's about understanding the power of perception.
Absolutely.
And narrative.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
And so relevant for anyone who really wants to understand the world around them.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of fascinating narratives, I'm really intrigued by this concept of virtuous war that the source material mentioned.
Okay.
Can you shed a little light on that for us?
Yeah, of course. Virtuous war refers to the way war is often portrayed.
Okay.
In this very sanitized, almost glamorous light.
Okay.
Especially in media and entertainment.
Right. So we see those heroic soldiers.
Exactly.
The high-tech weaponry, those decisive victories.
Yeah.
But rarely do we actually see the true costs and the complexities of the conflict.
No, we don't.
So it's like we're being presented with this carefully curated image of war.
We are.
That kind of ignores the human cost and those long-term consequences.
Exactly. And that distorted image can have very real-world implications.
Oh, I bet.
Influencing public opinion, policy decisions, and even the way wars are fought.
This is some pretty sobering stuff.
It is.
It really makes you think about how important it is to be critical of the information that we're consuming.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to something as serious as war.
Couldn't agree more.
This has been an incredible discussion so far.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
From the power of national image to the dangers of these virtuous war narratives. But we're going to have to leave it there for today.
Oh, okay.
And we'll pick this back up in part 2.
Sounds good.
Listeners, make sure to stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive.
Yes.
We're going to unpack this concept of virtuous war even further. And we'll explore how it actually shapes our understanding of global conflict.
It's going to be good.
It is. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into this whole virtuous war concept.
Okay.
And how it's really distorts our perception of conflict. Before the break, you mentioned this military-industrial media entertainment network.
I did, yes.
Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure.
How does this network actually work to shape the way we see war?
Well, it's it's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah.
And frankly, a bit concerning.
Okay.
You see, this network is kind of this complex web of interconnected institutions.
Okay.
From weapons manufacturers and defense contractors to media outlets, Hollywood studios, and even video game developers these days.
So it's really this whole ecosystem
It is.
that contributes to creating a certain image of war.
Exactly. And each of these players has a role in shaping that narrative.
So it's not just about governments controlling the message anymore.
No, not at all.
It's this whole, machine.
Yeah, you could say that. Think about it. We experience war through these very carefully curated lenses.
Okay.
News reports often focus on, the technological advancements, the military prowess.
Right.
While movies and TV shows tend to glorify combat and heroism.
Right. It's all very romanticized, isn't it?
It is. And even video games, which are becoming increasingly realistic.
Yeah.
They turn war into this kind of thrilling, immersive experience.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this network kind of operates.
Yeah.
But why? Why is this sanitized image of war so dangerous?
Well, Because it creates this very dangerous disconnect between the sanitized image that we're presented with and the very brutal realities on the ground.
Right, so it's almost like a propaganda machine, in a way.
You could say that, yeah.
Yeah.
When war is presented as this clean, high-tech affair, it becomes a lot easier to ignore the very real human costs.
The long-term consequences. And, all the complex political realities that fuel these conflicts in the first place.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember that war is never, ever a simple equation.
Right.
It's a complex human drama with very far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, and those consequences, they extend far beyond the battlefield.
They do. This reminds me of something the source material highlighted.
Okay.
About how this distorted image can actually lead policymakers to make really poor decisions.
Okay, can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. You see, if leaders really believe in this myth of a clean, technologically driven war, they might underestimate the complexities, the human costs, and the long-term consequences of military intervention.
So it's almost like they're going in with a flawed mental image.
Exactly.
Of what war actually entails.
Yeah. They're not prepared for the messiness, the unpredictability, and often the really tragic realities of conflict.
And that can lead to, I imagine, strategic blunders.
Oh, absolutely.
Prolonged conflicts, and ultimately just a lot more suffering.
Absolutely.
Wow. This is pretty sobering stuff.
It is, yeah.
It really makes you think about how important it is to be critical of the information we're consuming.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to something as, as serious as war.
I couldn't agree more. We need to be aware of how these images are constructed, who benefits from them, and what realities they might be obscuring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is especially important, I imagine, for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC.
It is.
Understanding these virtuous war narratives, how they're constructed, how they're disseminated, that's crucial for analyzing international relations.
Absolutely. It's not just about memorizing those facts and figures.
Right.
It's about developing a really nuanced understanding of how perceptions actually shape actions on the world stage.
And for those of you taking the UPSC, being able to critically analyze these narratives, that can really set you apart. So as we navigate this really complex world of images and perceptions, especially when it comes to, something as weighty as war, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's crucial to recognize that images, especially the surrounding war, are really powerful tools for shaping public opinion and influencing policy decisions.
Right.
But they can also be incredibly misleading.
So it's all about being critical consumers of information.
It is, yeah.
Questioning the narratives that are presented to us.
Absolutely.
Seeking out diverse perspectives.
Yeah, don't just passively absorb the information you're given. Actively engage with it. Ask questions. Seek out alternative viewpoints. Compare different accounts of the same event. And always be mindful of potential biases. Both conscious and unconscious.
That's excellent advice, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information from all sides.
All sides.
Now, I'm curious, what are some practical steps that our listeners can actually take to become more aware of these images and their influence, particularly when it comes to understanding global conflicts?
Well, one simple but really effective strategy is to diversify your media diet. Don't just rely on a single source for your news and information. Seek out perspectives from different countries, different cultures, different ideological viewpoints.
So breaking out of our echo chambers.
Exactly.
Exposing ourselves to a wider range of perspectives.
Yes. Another helpful tip is to pay attention to the language being used. Are there certain words or phrases that are being used to evoke specific emotions? Or frame the narrative in a particular way?
So being really sensitive to how language can be used to shape our perceptions.
Exactly. And finally, I think it's important to remember that even seemingly objective sources can be influenced by unconscious biases or cultural perspectives.
Right. It's like that old adage, everyone has a story.
They do.
And understanding those different stories, those diverse perspectives, really helps us to see the bigger picture more clearly.
It does. It's about developing a critical lens, a healthy skepticism, and a genuine curiosity about the world around us.
And for our UPSC aspirants out there,
Yeah.
honing these skills, absolutely essential for success in the exam and beyond.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really insightful discussion so far.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground,
I have.
From the power of national image to the dangers of these virtuous war narratives.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up completely, I want to touch on one more crucial aspect of this whole topic.
Okay.
And that is the role of technology.
Oh, great point. Yeah. Technology plays a huge role in shaping the images that we see and the narratives that we consume, especially when it comes to war.
Yeah. I mean, just think about the impact of social media.
Absolutely.
Drone footage, sophisticated propaganda techniques.
Yeah, it's like technology has amplified the power of images, both for good and for bad.
Right. It's like a double-edged sword.
It is.
It can bring us closer to the realities of conflicts, but it can also be used to manipulate and distort those realities.
Very easily.
With alarming ease.
Alarming ease. And that's why, critical thinking becomes absolutely crucial. We can't just take everything we see at face value anymore.
Right.
We need to question the source.
Okay.
Analyze the context.
Right.
And consider the motivations behind the images and narratives that we encounter.
This is especially important for those UPSC aspirants.
It is.
You need to develop a really sharp and discerning eye.
You do.
When you're analyzing international relations.
Yeah.
You can't afford to be swayed by some slick propaganda or, emotionally charged imagery.
Absolutely not. You need to be able to peel back the layers, identify the underlying narratives, and understand that really complex interplay of technology, perception, and power.
Okay, so let's dive into some specific examples then.
Okay.
How is technology actually transforming the way we see and understand war?
All right.
So let's dive in. How is technology really transforming the way we see and understand war?
Well, we touched on social media a little bit earlier, and it's really been a game changer.
Okay.
You see, social media has democratized the flow of information in a way that we've never seen before.
Okay, so we're no longer just relying on those traditional media outlets to shape our understanding of conflict.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, individuals on the ground, citizen journalists, activists, even combatants themselves, they can share their perspectives with the world instantly.
So it's like we're getting a more diverse range of viewpoints, which is good, right?
It is, yeah.
But it also makes it a lot harder, I imagine, to distinguish between truth and fiction.
Absolutely.
Fact and propaganda.
Exactly. And that's where media literacy becomes absolutely essential. We need to be able to assess the credibility of sources, evaluate the accuracy of information, and recognize those potential biases or agendas at play.
This sounds like a tall order.
It is.
It's like we need to become these amateur detectives.
Yeah.
Constantly sifting through evidence and questioning everything that we see.
In a way, yes. And it's a skill that's becoming increasingly important.
Yeah.
Not just for understanding global conflicts, but for, navigating this complex digital world that we live in.
Absolutely. So what are some practical tips for developing that kind of media literacy?
One good starting point is diversifying your media diet.
Okay.
Just like we talked about before, don't rely on a single source for news.
Okay.
Seek out perspectives from different countries, different cultures, different ideological viewpoints.
So it's about breaking out of those echo chambers and exposing ourselves to a wider range of perspectives.
Precisely. But you're right, it can be really hard to know where to even start.
Yeah, especially with so much misinformation and propaganda out there.
Absolutely. A helpful tip is to check the About Us section of websites or social media accounts.
Okay.
Look for information about their funding sources, their editorial policies, their overall mission.
So it's kind of like doing a background check.
It is, yeah. It can give you some clues about their potential biases or agendas.
That's a great tip. Now, beyond social media, what are some other technological advancements that are really impacting the way we see war?
Well, another major development is the increasing use of drone technology.
Right.
Drones provide this, bird's eye view of the battlefield. They're capturing footage that was previously impossible to obtain.
Right. We've all seen those really dramatic drone strikes.
Yeah.
And aerial surveillance video. It feels like we're getting this really real-time perspective on conflict.
We are, in a way, but there's also a downside to that.
Okay.
You see, drone footage can be incredibly sanitized.
Okay.
It often lacks the context and the nuance that's really necessary to fully understand the situation on the ground.
So it's like we're seeing the conflict through this, I don't know, detached lens.
Yeah.
Almost like a video game in a way.
It can feel that way, yeah. And we lose that human element, the emotional impact of what's actually happening to people.
The real people on the ground.
Exactly. And this can lead to that dangerous disconnect that we were talking about earlier, between those sanitized images that we see and the brutal realities of war.
It's easy to forget that those grainy figures on the screen are actual people with lives, families, stories.
Exactly. This reminds me of the concept of virtuous war that we discussed earlier, where conflict is presented in this, clean, almost glamorous light. And I think drone technology might actually be contributing to that narrative.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's something we really need to be mindful of as consumers of information. Just because we're seeing more footage, more evidence of war, doesn't mean we're getting a more accurate or complete picture.
So it's not just about the quantity of information that we consume, but the quality as well.
Exactly. We need to be discerning, we need to be critical, and we need to always question those narratives.
And that's where those critical thinking skills really come into play, right?
Oh, absolutely. We need to be able to analyze the information that we're given, consider multiple perspectives, and draw our own conclusions.
This is incredibly valuable advice, not just for understanding global conflicts, but for navigating this complex digital age that we live in.
Absolutely.
This has been an incredible deep dive into how images, perception, and technology are really shaping our understanding of global politics.
It has.
And I think the key takeaway for me, at least, is the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and constantly questioning the narratives that we encounter.
Well said. It's about recognizing that those images that we see, especially those surrounding conflict, are often very carefully constructed and disseminated for very specific purposes. We need to be aware of those purposes, those agendas, and always strive for a more nuanced and balanced understanding of the world around us.
This has been a truly insightful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has empowered you to become more critical consumers of information.
Yes.
And approach the world with a more discerning eye.
Absolutely.
Remember to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more fascinating explorations into the world of international relations. Until next time.
See you then.